So how big is the problem? Well, let me give you some numbers to give you a sense of just what the Preservation Society does. 500,000 people take 780,000 tours a year at the properties of the Preservation Society. We employ as many as 400 people. That economic impact was estimated 5 years ago at over $100 million for the Rhode Island economy. No doubt it is more now. We draw people from 20 nations and all 48 of the lower states every year. These are people who are interested in what is called heritage and cultural tourism, and you'll hear a lot more about that from your new chairman of the Rhode Island Economic Development Corporation, because it's a phrase he coined, but we've adopted, and it describes the fastest growing and most lucrative components of the tourism industry. Many of these people arrive on cruise ships, and in fact, we have potentially the best cruise ship season in Rhode Island's history coming up this year. I hold in my hand that expected schedule. We're going to see the Queen Mary II, we're going to see Caribbean Princess, we're going to see Eurodam. We're dealing with companies like Norwegian Cruise Line, Holland America, Princess, Cunard, the list goes on. These companies are not, frankly, going to be prepared to sit still on short notice if their ships have to stay in a harbor for an extended period of time because an LNG tanker's coming through. Those ships alone represent over 20,000 admissions just to the Preservation Society's properties a year. You can imagine the impact on the rest of the city of Newport and the surrounding communities, as well as the state. Additionally, 100,000 visitors a year come to the Preservation Society on motor coaches. Motor coaches, like cruise ships, operate on schedules, and they are very sensitive to access. Now, people have talked about the idea that, well, a bridge closure just means some backed up traffic on the highway. Well, that may be true if you're looking at the highway on the far side of the bridge from Newport. But if that bridge is closed on a Saturday afternoon, think with me for a moment what happens to that backed up traffic. It backs up onto Farewell Street, it backs up onto Connell Highway. We already struggle with our traffic congestion in Newport, and we don't need a reputation that says not only can you not get there easily, you can't get around at all. And that can happen on almost any summer day. You begin to get the feeling for the problem. Now let me give you a couple of more dimensions, and then I will stop and take any questions you may have. One of the objections that can be made to our point about the effect on cruise ships is, well, you know, cruise ships park in Boston Harbor, and yet that LNG tanker sails right up the harbor. What's the problem? The answer is Black Falcon Pier. The cruise ships that visit Newport are not serviced by a pier. In Boston, the passengers can come and go by going up and down a gangway. When they come and go from the cruise ships in Newport Harbor, they do so on small boats. If that small boat service has to be interrupted for an extended period during the day, then we wind up with yet another problem. We wind up with angry customers. We wind up with cruise ship companies who aren't going to want to come back. By the way, we have 7 dates this year when there are 2 super ships in the harbor at the same time. So again, the problem magnifies itself as soon as you begin to look at it in detail. I also want to make one other point about the fragility of the tourism industry when it comes to the cultural resources that are supported by it. Many of you may know, perhaps not all, that we have lost to a private home one of the very popular tourist attractions in Newport. Astor's Belcourt could not make a go of it financially. The property has been sold to a private home owner. That individual is certainly going to take great care of the property, but it's gone from public access. Same thing is true of Hammersmith Farm. Belcourt Castle is in a fragile financial position. What about the B&Bs in Newport? The list goes on and on and on. The Preservation Society will be here next year, the year after that. The breakers will be open. All of those things are sure. But how many people we employ? That's an open question. How many hours can we give our employees? That's an open question. And what happens to all the small businesses? Now, this is just on-ground cultural tourism. We could go on at great length about the impact on the yachting community. There is talk now of the possibility of seeing competition toward the America's Cup taking place in Newport. The question arises, would that be jeopardized by the kind of transits of LNG tankers? There are a whole host of concerns here that we think ultimately are fatal to this proposal. In the end, our view is that Rhode Island has a stake in an enormously important, long-standing industrial base, which is its tourism industry. And we should not fool around with that, particularly when the benefits of the proposal are highly speculative and, frankly, don't inure to the coffers of the state of Rhode Island, much less to the businesses who pay the taxes and the property owners who pay the taxes. So we would oppose this proposal. Thank you, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Rodman. I want to tell you that that was probably one of the most cogent and comprehensive reports I've seen, particularly because I did not detect a reference to any notes. So you have my respect on that, sir. I want to first open it up, want to note that Senator Michael McCaffrey from the great city of Warwick has joined us also on the dais. And I want to open it up for any questions for the witness. I do want to suggest, because I think we've had conversations in the past, certainly tourist dollars are in particular discretionary. Somebody can go, as much as we admire Newport, somebody can find another place to spend their tourist dollars, and any sort of inconvenience is likely, at least incrementally, to have people go some other place. And once you lose them, it is often, not likely that they're going to return. Mm-hmm. So it's been a strong industry. Of course, I remember Newport back in the 70s when nobody would visit it. Okay, so, but it's been a strong industry over the last 30 years, and certainly a lot due to the efforts of the Preservation Society. So I thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
And, appreciate your testimony. Next, I would like to call the Jamestown LNG Work Group, Gordon Carrollton and Ellen Withler. Last second reconnoitering, and now are we all set to go?
Yeah,
just make sure your mics are on, and as I mentioned, counterintuitive, the button has to be up.
There
All
we
right,
go.
thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Gordon Carrollton. I've been involved with the Jamestown Working Group, as well as the Coalition for Responsible Siting of LNG Facilities for quite some time. I've lived in this area most of my life. I've lived in Swansea, Fall River. I've lived in Portsmouth on the Sakonnet, as well as the east side of Portsmouth. I've also lived in Jamestown by the entrance to Narragansett Bay, and now I live in Somerset. I've been a lifelong user of the Bay. I'm not an environmentalist or a politician, and I have no real financial interest in this project, one way or another. It's taken me 3 years to review this project and the thousands of documents related to it. After extensive research on every aspect of the project, it is my opinion that this will not be good for our area, and quite to the contrary, it will cause many problems for us that we do not face today. I've spoken to people from all over the area and found there are many thousands of people who feel the same way as I do for a variety of reasons. This is the case even though there have been misleading statements put out in the public by the company Weaver's Cove. I would also add that some local news media outlets have been openly supportive of this project, even though there seems to be a consensus among their readership that to the contrary, which is very concerning to me. One thing that's always bothered me about Hess LNG is that they're constantly changing their statements. It seems as though their statements change depending on what they perceive as the greatest obstruction to their project at any point in time. They don't always tell the truth, and at the same time act like they're offended by statements that others make, which they claim to be inaccurate.